A black delivery girl was humiliated and threatened on the floor of a luxury Seoul high-rise for a mistake she didn't even make. The man who laughed at her had no idea that the silent Korean in the doorway owned every building on that street, and that he was about to burn down a billionaire's reputation to protect her. It was a humid Tuesday in Itaewon, the kind of heat that stuck your clothes to your skin like a second layer of grief, the kind where the neon lights of the city felt like they were vibrating against your skull. Rowan adjusted her red delivery cap and stepped out of the 24-hour convenience store where she just bought her only meal of the day. It was 4 a.m. The hills of Seoul were finally, briefly, still. Nothing moved but the steam rising from the sewer grates and the rhythmic hum of her electric scooter's dying battery. She felt a familiar hollowness, a dull ache in her lower back that had become her constant companion over 8 months in Korea. The last thing she'd eaten was a triangle kimbap at noon yesterday. She'd saved the second one for tomorrow morning to stretch her one until payday. Her worn sneakers tapped a tired rhythm on the steep, wet asphalt as she pushed her bike toward her cramped villa. She was exhausted, the kind of bone-deep fatigue where every breath felt like a heavy lift. 12 hours weaving through aggressive traffic. 12 hours bowing to customers who didn't see her. 12 hours of foreigner stares and dispatcher shouts. All of it just to earn enough to keep a visa that felt like a leash. Mia was 24. She had deep, dark brown skin and a face that had learned to carry a mask of polite indifference. She turned into the narrow, graffiti-covered alley that led to her basement studio. It was the same path she walked every night, past Bin's breathing damp rot. She wasn't afraid of the silence. She'd lived in the silence of being an outsider her whole life. She passed the small nook behind the laundromat, where an old stray cat usually waited. Out of habit, she stopped and pulled a single dried fish snack from her pocket. One she'd pocketed from a discarded side dish earlier. She placed it on a clean piece of cardboard. Her eyes softened, a fleeting warmth that she never allowed the city to see. With the discarded things of the world, she was different. They didn't demand a visa. They didn't judge her accent. She stood and kept walking. Her studio was a half-basement, with a window that looked out at people's ankles. The heater had been temperamental since October, and the walls were thin enough to hear the city's heartbeat. She shut the door, sat on the edge of her thin mattress, and looked at the half-eaten kimbap on the table. Her breakfast. She thought about her 10 a.m. shift, 5 hours of sleep. If the dreams didn't wake her up first. The rain in Seoul did not just fall. It owned the night. It turned the neon signs into blurry streaks of pink and blue on the wet asphalt. Rowan adjusted her red cap, feeling the damp fabric stick to her forehead. She looked at her phone. The screen was a spider web of cracks, making it hard to see the delivery map. She had been on her feet for 9 hours. Her legs felt like heavy wooden poles, and her lower back hummed with a steady, dull ache. She didn't feel sorry for herself. Being bitter took too much energy, and Mia needed every bit of energy to keep moving. She was 24, and she had learned that the city was like a giant machine. It didn't care if she was tired. It didn't care that her rent was due in 2 days, and her bank account looked like a ghost town. To Seoul, she was just a red dot moving on a digital map. She was a ghost in a red polo shirt, delivering warm food to people who never looked at her eyes. Mia pulled her scooter to the curb in front of a building that looked like a giant silver needle. This was the kind of place where the air smelled like expensive perfume and silence. The glass doors were so clean they looked like water. As she walked inside, the warmth of the lobby hit her face, but it didn't feel welcoming. It felt like a warning. The doorman stood behind a marble desk. He was dressed better than most world leaders. As Mia approached, he didn't move his head. He looked right through her, his gaze landing on a spot on the wall behind her shoulder. To him, she wasn't a person. She was a delivery. She was a service to be managed. Delivery for 1502, Mia said. Her voice was steady and quiet. The doorman slid a clipboard toward her, without a word. Mia signed her name with a pen that was chained to the desk. Everything here was locked down or built to keep people out. She caught a reflection in the mirrored walls. Her dark skin looked deep and rich against the bright red of her uniform, but she looked small in this huge, cold space. She looked like a bug trapped in a very expensive jar. She walked toward the elevators. The carpet was so thick it swallowed the sound of her sneakers. There was no noise here, no honking cars, no shouting street vendors, just the soft hum of air conditioning. This building was a fortress for people who had enough money to buy peace and quiet. She stepped into the elevator and pressed a button for the top floor. The lift moved so smoothly she only knew she was rising because the numbers on the panel flickered. 7, 10, 14. She adjusted the heavy thermal bag on her shoulder. The smell of fried chicken and spicy sauce drifted out, a sharp contrast to the clean, scentless air of the elevator. The door slid open on the 15th floor with a soft chime. The hallway was lined with dark wood and gold lights. Mia stepped out, her wet shoes leaving faint marks on the shiny floor. She started the long walk toward the door at the end of the hall. She didn't know that behind that door, her life was waiting to break apart. She just knew she had one more delivery to make before she could go home. High above the wet streets of Seoul, the world was silent. In the penthouse of the Silver Needle building, Choi Gun-woo stood by a window that stretched from the floor to the ceiling. Below him, the city looked like a map of glowing veins, but from this height, the noise and smell of the rain could not reach him. His apartment was large and very expensive, but it did not feel like a home. There were no messy piles of books or soft blankets. Every chair was perfectly straight. Every surface was polished marble or dark wood. It was a space built for a man who lived his life like a game of chess. Gun-woo was the chairman of the Choi Syndicate. In the streets, people spoke his name in whispers. He owned shipping companies, tall office buildings, and hotels, but he also owned the things that were not written on paper. He owned the loyalty of men who never asked questions. He owned the silence of people who knew too much. He had survived in a dangerous world for a long time because he was not loud. He was like a deep river, quiet on the surface, but powerful enough to move mountains. He was 36 years old, and he lived in a world of perfect order. He did not use his power to show off. He did not drive flashy cars to get attention. To Gun-woo, power was a tool like a scalpel. You use it only when necessary, and you use it with total control. "The car is ready, Chairman," a voice said from the shadows. Gun-woo turned. His bodyguard, Park Jae-han, stood by the door. Jae-han was a large man who moved like a shadow. He had been with Gun-woo for 10 years, and he was the only person allowed to speak without being asked. Gun-woo nodded. He picked up his suit jacket and pulled it on. It fit him perfectly, sharp and black. He adjusted his deep red tie. It was the only bit of color in his dark world. As they walked toward the private elevator, Gun-woo's eyes moved over the room. He noticed a tiny speck of dust on a side table. He noticed that the temperature was 1 degree colder than usual. He noticed everything. It was a habit that had saved his life more than once. Most people moved to the world with their eyes half shut, but Gun-woo saw the cracks in the walls and the hidden meanings in a person's smile. They stepped into the elevator. This lift was different from the one the delivery workers used. It was lined with gold and smelled like sandalwood. Gun-woo stood perfectly still as the elevator began to move down. He was headed to a meeting on the 15th floor. It was a simple business meeting, a routine part of his night. He did not expect anything to be different tonight. He did not expect his world of perfect order to be interrupted. But as the elevator slowed and the doors began to slide open, a sound reached him. It was a harsh, loud laugh. It was the sound of someone being cruel, because they thought no one important was watching. Gun-woo stepped out into the hallway, his eyes narrowing as they landed on a girl in a bright red uniform. For the first time in a long time, the chairman felt a spark of something he hadn't felt in years. Curiosity. Mia reached door 1502. Her hands were cold, and her fingers felt stiff as she reached for the thermal bag. She just wanted to hand over the food, get a digital signature, and leave. But as he pulled the bag toward her, she heard a sharp, sickening sound. The heavy paper handle of the restaurant bag snapped. Before she could react, the containers tumbled out. They hit the shiny floor with a series of wet thuds. Spicy red sauce splashed across the dark wood, and noodles slid like pale snakes over the polished surface. "Oh no," Mia whispered. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She didn't wait. She dropped to her knees, her red uniform stretching tight across her back. This was her life. When things broke, she was the one who had to fix them. She used her bare hands to try and scoop the warm food back into the broken boxes. She was breathing fast, her eyes stinging with a thread of tears she refused to let fall. The door to 1502 swung open wide. A man stood there. He was tall, wearing an expensive silk shirt that cost more than Mia's scooter. This was Brent Maddox. He didn't look at the mess with surprise. He looked at Mia with a cold, sharp smile that made her skin crawl. He looked like he had been waiting for a reason to be mean. "Look at this," Brent said. His voice was loud and harsh, echoing off the walls. He pulled a silver phone from his pocket and pointed the camera at her. "Look at the state of you. Do they just hire anyone off the street now?" Mia looked up, her hands covered in red sauce. "I am so sorry, sir. The bag broke. I can call the office. I can get you a refund." "A refund?" Brent laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. He stepped closer, looming over her. "You're a mess. Look at that cheap uniform. You can't even carry a bag correctly. What are you even worth if you can't do a simple job like this?" Doors began to open down the hallway. A woman in a robe peeked out, her face full of judgment. A man stepped out of the stairwell, stopping to watch the show. Mia felt their eyes on her. She felt the weight of her dark skin and her red shirt. She felt like she was being erased in front of a crowd. "Please," Mia said, her voice trembling for the first time. She looked at the man from the stairwell, hoping for a kind word, a hand to help her up. "Please, can someone just help me?" Brent threw his head back and let out a booming laugh. He turned the phone toward the neighbors. "She wants help. Maybe she should have stayed in school instead of dropping my dinner on the floor." He looked back down at her, his finger pointing directly into her face. He was enjoying this. He was enjoying the power of making her feel like nothing. Mia stayed on the floor, her head bowed, waiting for the world to swallow her whole. Then, the elevator at the end of the hall opened with a soft chime. The laughter didn't stop, but the air in the hallway suddenly felt different. It grew heavy and cold. The sound of hard, steady footsteps began to move toward them. They were slow and perfectly timed. Every person in the hall went silent as a man in a black suit stepped into the light. The sound of the footsteps stopped exactly 3 feet from where Mia knelt on the floor. The hallway, which had been filled with Brent's loud, jagged laughter, was now so quiet that Mia could hear the soft hum of the light fixtures above. She didn't look up at first. She was too busy staring at the red sauce on her fingers and the ruined noodles on the dark wood. Then, a hand appeared in her field of vision. It was a man's hand, steady and clean, with a white cuff peeking out from a black suit sleeve. He didn't grab her arm or pull her. He simply waited. Mia reached out and took it. His grip was firm and dry, and he lifted her to her feet with a slow, deliberate strength that made her feel like she finally had a place to stand. Only then did Mia look at him. It was the man from the elevator. Up close, his face was like a piece of carved stone, sharp, handsome, and completely calm. He didn't look at the mess on the floor. He didn't look at the neighbors peeking out of their doors. He looked only at Mia for a heartbeat, making sure she was steady. "Who do you think you are?" Brent's voice broke the silence. He was still holding his phone, but he looked smaller now, his face turning a nervous shade of red. "This is my floor. I pay a lot of money to live here, and I don't need some stranger interfering. This girl is a disaster, and these are my rules." Choi Gun-woo turned his head slowly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look angry. When he spoke, his voice was low and smooth, but it carried a weight that seemed to push the air out of the hallway. "You are mistaken," Gun-woo said. "This is not your building. You merely rent a space inside it. This building belongs to a holding company called Silver Needle Group. I have owned that company for 3 years." The shift in the hallway was like an earthquake that made no sound. Brent's hand started to shake, and his phone slowly dipped toward the floor until the screen went dark. The neighbors quickly shut their doors. The man who had been watching from the stairwell disappeared back into the shadows. Brent tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, but no words came out. Gun-woo didn't threaten him. He didn't move toward him. He simply stood there, an immovable mountain, in a black suit. "What has happened here has been noted," Gun-woo continued. "Cruelty is not a part of the lease." He turned back to Mia. For the first time, the coldness in his eyes seemed to thin out. "You will be compensated," he said quietly, "for the order, for the time you have lost, and for the way you were treated." He didn't ask for her phone number. He didn't ask where she lived. He simply looked at the small white patch on her red shirt. "Mia Rowan," he said, repeating the name as if he were memorizing a line of poetry. "Yes," she whispered. Gunwoo gave a single, sharp nod to his bodyguard, Jaehan, who stepped forward to handle the mess. Then the chairman gestured toward the open elevator. Mia stepped inside. The door slid shut, hiding the sight of Brent Maddox, standing frozen in his doorway. As the elevator began to move down, Mia looked at her hands. They were still shaking, and the spicy red sauce was still under her fingernails. But as she gripped the handle of her empty delivery bag, the shaking wasn't from shame anymore. It was from the realization that, for the first time in her life, someone powerful had looked at her and actually seen a human being. The next morning, the sun struggled to break through the gray soul clouds. Mia woke up in her basement studio, the smell of spicy red sauce still clinging to her memory. She washed her hands 3 times, scrubbing until her skin was pink, but she still felt the weight of the night before. She didn't tell her roommates about the man in the black suit. They were busy with their own lives, and the story felt too strange to be true. It felt like a dream she had made up to comfort herself while kneeling on a cold floor. She went back to work. She zipped up her red jacket, climbed onto her scooter, and began weaving to the tight streets of Itaewon. Every time a black car drove past, her heart jumped, but it was never him. She thought about Choi Gunwoo the way a person thinks about a ghost, something powerful and silent that had appeared just long enough to change the air. She didn't expect to see him again. Men like that lived in glass towers. Girls like her lived in the shadows beneath them. Across the city, Brent Maddox was not thinking about ghosts. He was sitting in his penthouse, the morning light showing the angry red patches on his neck. He couldn't stop replaying the scene in the hallway. He could still feel the eyes of his neighbors on him. He could still hear the quiet, steady voice of the man who had made him look small. To Brent, being made to look small was a sin he could not forgive. He didn't care about the food. He cared that a girl in a cheap uniform had seen him lose. He picked up his phone. His fingers didn't shake this time. He called the main office of Red Dash Delivery. When the manager answered, Brent's voice was smooth and polite, the voice of a man who moved in important circles. "Yes, I'm calling about a delivery last night," Brent said, leaning back in his leather chair. The rider was very aggressive. She dropped the food intentionally and then made a scene in the hallway. It was quite frightening for my guests. I believe her name is Mia Rowan. He listened to manager apologize, a thin smile spreading across his face. He didn't stop there. He made a second call to the agency that managed his apartment and several others in the area. He knew the people who ran the rental boards. He knew how to drop a name and a safety concern about a certain tenant living in a basement villa nearby. He moved like a snake in the grass, quiet, hidden, and focused on the heel of the person who had stepped on him. Mia knew nothing of the phone calls. She was busy delivering a heavy box of books to the 4th floor of a building with no elevator. She was sweating, her legs burning, but she was thinking about the rent. She was thinking about the compensation the man had promised, though no money had appeared in her account yet. She told herself not to hope. Hope was a dangerous thing when you were poor. When she finally sat down for a 5-minute break, she pulled out her cracked phone. There was a new email waiting for her. The subject line was cold and short. Notice of termination. Mia read the words twice. The email said a high-profile customer had filed a formal complaint regarding unprofessional behavior and intentional property damage. Because she was still in her first year, her contract was being ended immediately. Her app login was already disabled. Just like that, her red uniform meant nothing. The city had flicked her away like a speck of dust, and Brent Maddox was just getting started. The next 3 weeks felt like watching a slow-motion car crash, and Mia was the only one in the driver's seat. After losing her job at Red Dash, she didn't panic at first. She was used to the world being hard. She spent her mornings at a small internet cafe, her eyes stinging from the blue light of the monitor as she applied for every opening she could find. She was a good worker. She had never been late. But something strange was happening. A local diner offered her a prep shift on Tuesday, but when she showed up on Wednesday, The owner wouldn't look her in the eye. "The position is filled," he muttered, pushing a mop across the floor. Then her landlord called. He told her he was not renewing her lease next month because of complaints he wouldn't explain. Every time she reached for a handle, the door seemed to lock right before her fingers touched it. Mia sat on her narrow bed, her stomach growling. Her dry, internal voice was still there, telling her to keep calm, but something underneath was starting to fray like an old rope. She felt like a ghost that was slowly being erased from the map of the city. She went to the rental office to ask why her application for a new studio was rejected. The woman behind the desk just pointed at a computer screen. "Your name is flagged in the system, Miss Rowan. We can't help you." "Flagged for what?" Mia asked, her voice small. The woman shrugged and went back to typing. There were no answers in the city for people who didn't have power. As Mia walked back to her basement, she saw Ji-yeon, the girl who worked at the convenience store downstairs. Ji-yeon had been in the hallway that night. She had seen Brent Maddox screaming. She caught Mia's arm and pulled her into the shadow of the building. "Mia, be careful," Ji-yeon whispered, looking around. "I heard the landlord talking. He said a wealthy American man called the office. He was asking questions about you. He sounded angry." Mia felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She hadn't connected the dots yet. She thought it was just a string of bad luck, the kind that follows poor people around like a stray dog. She didn't want to believe that one man's bruised ego could reach this far into her life. Meanwhile, in a glass office that felt like a different planet, Choi Gun-woo sat at a desk made of dark glass. His lieutenant, Jaehan, stood across from him, holding a tablet. "Chairman," Jaehan said, his voice low. One of the managers from the Silver Needle building mentioned a name during the morning report. Brent Maddox. He filed a formal complaint against a delivery worker. He's been making calls to our property partners, too. Gun-woo didn't move. He didn't look up from the papers on his desk. He lived in a world where names came and went, but the silence in the room grew heavy. He remembered the red uniform. He remembered the quiet dignity of the girl kneeling in the sauce. "Bring me the full file on the incident," Gun-woo commanded, "and the background of the employee." 5 minutes later, a digital file appeared on his screen. Gun-woo scrolled past the text, past the complaints, and stopped at the last page. It was a simple identification photo from the Red Dash office. It was a woman in a bright red uniform, her dark brown hair tied back, her gray eyes carrying a look of caution. Gun-woo stared at the photo for a long time. The order of his world had been disturbed, and the chairman did not like disorder. The report on Choi Gun-woo's desk was not long, but it was heavy with the weight of a man's cruelty. His team had worked fast. They had tracked every phone call Brent Maddox made, every safety concern he whispered to building managers, and the exact email that had ended Mia Rowan's job. It was a systematic campaign designed to make a person disappear without ever laying a finger on them. It was deliberate. It was cowardly. And to Gun-woo, it was a mess that needed to be cleaned. He did not shout. He did not slam his hand on the desk. He simply sat in the silence of his office, his gray eyes fixed on the photograph of the girl in the red uniform. He was recalibrating. In his world, when a person caused this much disorder, they became a problem. And Gun-woo was very good at solving problems. He found Mia 2 hours later. She wasn't in her basement studio. She was sitting on a wooden bench in a small, quiet park near the Han River. It was a place where people went when they had nowhere else to be. She was wearing a plain gray hoodie, her shoulders slumped, watching the muddy water flow past. She looked smaller than she had in the hallway, like the city was finally winning its battle to crush her. The sound of polished shoes on the gravel made her turn. When she saw the man in the black suit, her breath hitched. For a second, she looked like she might run, but Gun-woo stopped several feet away, giving her space. "Brent Maddox has been busy," Gun-woo said. His voice was low, blending with the sound of the distant traffic. He told her everything. He told her about the calls to Red Dash, the lies told to the rental office, and the way her name had been flagged in the system. Mia listened in silence, her hands shaking in the pockets of her hoodie. She had suspected it, but hearing it out loud made the world feel cold and sharp. She realized then that she wasn't just unlucky, She was being hunted. Why? She whispered, looking up at him. All because I dropped some noodles? Because you saw him look small, Gunwoo replied. Some men cannot live with that. He stepped a leaf's width closer. He didn't offer her money, and he didn't tell her he had already handled it. Instead, he did something no one in Mia's life had ever done. He looked at her as an equal. I can end this, Gunwoo said, but I want to know one thing. Mia Rowan, what do you want? The question was disorienting. Mia was used to being told what to do, where to go, and how to feel. No one with this kind of power had ever asked for her opinion. She thought about the last 3 weeks. The hunger, the fear of being deported, the way people looked through her. She thought about the save the cat moment in the alley and the way she had worked so hard just to be flicked away like dust. Her voice was steady when she finally spoke. I want him to face something real. I want him to know he can't just erase people because he's bored. And I want my life back. I want to stand in the city and not have to apologize for breathing. Gunwoo watched her. He saw the fire behind the caution in her gray eyes. He saw a woman who was no longer shrinking. He gave a single, sharp nod. Then that's what happens, he said. The promise hung in the air, final and cold as iron. The change did not start with a bang. It started with a cold, quiet silence that began to wrap around Brent Maddox's life. One morning, he tried to enter the exclusive gym in the Silver Needle building, but his key card did not work. The doorman, the same one who looked through Mia, now looked through Brent with a face as hard as stone. When Brent called his business partners, the phones rang until they went to voicemail. His invitations to high-level parties stopped coming. It was as if a giant hand had reached down and erased his name from the list of people who mattered in Seoul. Then came the legal papers. A formal complaint was filed against his company, accusing him of breaking contract rules and engaging in harassment. It was the kind of legal mess that would take years to fix and cost a great deal of money. Brent was a man who traded in his reputation, and suddenly, that reputation was shifting. People started whispering when he entered a room. The political connections he had bragged about were suddenly very busy and could not take his calls. Brent was not a stupid man. He knew this was not bad luck. He made one attempt to find out who was pulling the strings, calling a friend who worked in the city's high office. The friend's voice was shaking. Brent, don't ask me that. Don't ever call this number again. Brent looked out at the city from his penthouse and felt a cold, sharp fear. He did not ask any more questions. He understood that he had stepped on a shadow that was much larger than he was. He stopped making calls. He stopped filing complaints. He simply sat in his quiet apartment and watched his world shrink. While Brent's life was contracting, Mia's life began to reinflate. It happened the way good things rarely do for people like her, without a visible source and without a price tag. First, the manager from Red Dash called. He sounded nervous and offered her job back with a significant raise and a formal apology letter. Mia listened, her heart thumping, but she didn't say yes. She didn't need to. An hour later, an email arrived from a high-end logistics company she had applied to weeks ago. They weren't offering her a delivery route. They were offering her a job as a shift coordinator. It was a real job with a desk and salary that made her eyes water. Then, the rental office called. There was a mistake in our system, Miss Rowan, the woman said, her voice unusually sweet. Your application for the studio apartment has been approved. We've even waived the deposit. Choi Gunwoo did not call her brag. He did not send a message saying, I told you so. The help arrived like the morning sun, silent and certain. Mia didn't have to apologize for breathing anymore. She didn't have to shrink. 2 days later, Mia stood in the center of her new apartment. It was small, but it was clean, and it had a window that let in the golden afternoon light. There was no tape on glass, and the heater hummed with a strong, steady warmth. She sat on the floor, leaning her back against the freshly painted wall. She had ordered takeout from a different company, and the spicy smell of noodles filled the room. She looked at the red delivery bag, sitting on the floor. For the first time in years, she felt light. She picked up a pair of wooden chopsticks and took a large bite, a small, genuine laugh bubbling up in her throat. She was still in the city, and she was still herself, but the world had finally stopped trying to push her out. She was Mia Rowan, and she was home. 6 weeks had passed since the night the bag broke in the hallway. From the outside, Mia Rowan's world looked very much the same. Seoul was still a city of rushing cars, bright neon lights, and the constant smell of street food. But from the inside, everything was different. Mia was no longer a ghost moving through the streets. She was a woman with a desk, a salary, and a key to a front door that actually belonged to her. She had learned at a very high cost what it looked like when someone chose to help her without asking for anything in return. It was a strange, heavy gift, and she was still learning how to carry it. One evening, as the golden hour turned the city into a sea of amber, there was a knock at her door. It wasn't the loud, angry pounding of a landlord or the impatient rap of a delivery driver. It was a quiet, steady sound. Mia opened the door and found Choi Gun-woo standing there. He wasn't wearing a suit jacket this time, just a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He looked slightly uncertain, a look that she realized he probably never allowed himself to have in his world of marble and glass. They stood in the doorway for a moment. Mia didn't pretend that she understood the dark world he lived in, and Gun-woo didn't pretend that he was a man she should trust easily. They were two people from different planets, brought together by a mess on a floor. "Your new job," Gun-woo said, his voice as low and smooth as always. "Is it what you wanted?" "It's a start," Mia replied. "It's a place where I don't have to hide." She stepped back and invited him into her modest kitchen. It was a small space, with only 2 chairs and a single window, but it was clean and warm. She offered him a cup of coffee. He accepted, his large, powerful hands looking out of place around her simple ceramic mug. They sat in a careful, honest silence. It wasn't a romance, and it wasn't a business deal. It was just two people acknowledging that they had seen each other when the rest of the world was looking away. When he left, the hallway felt quiet and still. A few minutes later, her doorbell rang again. Mia had ordered a small dinner from a local shop. She opened the door to find a young woman standing there. She was wearing a bright green uniform, her face flushed from the humidity, her eyes tired and focused on her phone. She looked exactly like Mia used to look, exhausted, invisible, and ready to apologize for being in the way. Mia took the bag and reached into her pocket. She handed the girl a tip that was far too large for a single order of rice. "Thank you," Mia said. She didn't say it the way most people did. As a quick habit, she said it with a weight that made the girl look up from her screen. The girl looked surprised. She saw Mia's gray eyes, steady and kind, and for a second, the two of them just looked at each other. Mia held her gaze, a silent promise passing between them. Some people are never given a room that fits them. Mia Rowan learned that some rooms you make, and some you are made for, and sometimes the difference is a person standing in the doorway who decides to look.